Evil Mill mocked me at her anniversary party, dismissing me as just a trophy wife and cruelly commenting on my miscarriage. Little did she know, her husband would soon shock everyone, and now she was facing the consequences. My husband, Mark, and I have been together for nearly 8 years, and while our marriage is filled with happiness, the tension with his parents has always been a source of conflict. My mother-in-law has held a grudge against me since our engagement, and while Phil was sweet, he often let Mill walk all over him. Mark comes from a wealthier background, and Mill has never missed an opportunity to let me know she disapproves of my middle-class roots. Her comments about my appearance, outfits, and even my shoes made me self-conscious. Despite my efforts to dress appropriately, to avoid her disdain, I began splurging on expensive clothes for family gatherings, hoping to shield myself from her pitying looks. One time, I wore a white shirt she'd seen a month earlier, and she sneered at me for repeating outfits, claiming that wealthy people never did that. Mark attempted to defend me, but Mill made sure her jabs were public. Reveling in my embarrassment, she would even drag me shopping, selecting clothes I didn't like but forcing me to accept them graciously. Despite my best efforts to cultivate a positive relationship, her conditional kindness soon revealed its true nature. After just a year of dating, I landed a job with a prestigious company, significantly enhancing my lifestyle. While Mark celebrated my success, Mill was furious. She bombarded me with calls and texts, demanding to know my salary, insisting that women and their family should earn less than their husbands. I was appalled, reminding her that I worked in a lucrative field, which meant I would likely out-earn Mark in the long run. She then declared that while I could keep my job, I would need to quit once I married Mark to avoid gossip about his inability to provide. I couldn't help but laugh. This was no longer the 1950s, and Mark had always supported my career. When I spoke to Mark about her behavior, he was enraged. After their conversation, Mill called me, screaming that I was trying to drive a wedge between her and her son, calling me the devil incarnate. She demanded I leave Mark, and I finally had enough. I cut the call and blocked her, exhausted by her toxicity. That was my first major red flag. Mark and I never broke up, but it did make me question the type of mother he had. Over the years, I couldn't completely sever ties with Mill, as family events often required my presence. At these gatherings, she would pretend I didn't exist. For instance, at Mark's cousin's birthday party, while everyone greeted us warmly, Mill would rush to hug Mark, ignoring me entirely. If Mark tried to include me in the conversation, she would quickly change the subject or look away, her indifference palpable. I noticed a disturbing pattern. She would often bring up her health issues, claiming she was aging and frail, which, oddly enough, was entirely untrue. It felt like a ploy to manipulate Mark into giving her the emotional attention she craved. When Mark finally proposed after years of dating, we celebrated with an engagement party. My family was ecstatic, but Mill's face soured the moment she saw my ring. She berated Mark for choosing a larger ring than hers, claiming it was disrespectful. Phil tried to intervene, urging her to keep quiet, but her relentless complaints continued, asserting that her son was doing everything for a poor girl like me. Infuriated, I told her that if she couldn't show me respect, she needed to leave. Mill's shock was evident, but I wouldn't allow her to ruin my happiest moment. Phil escorted her out while she yelled for Mark, who stood by my side. Later, she called Mark to apologize, claiming she was drunk, even though everyone knew she had barely touched her wine. We decided to let it slide. Then came the wedding planning, where Mill insisted on joining me for dress shopping, saying it was a lifelong dream. My patience was wearing thin, but I felt obligated to include her as Mark's mother. Predictably, Mill disapproved of my dress choices. She criticized me for wanting a style she deemed inappropriate, insisting I wear something more traditional. I stood firm, and my mother, protective of me, told Mill to mind her own business. Frustrated, Mill sulked in a corner, arms crossed like a petulant child. Despite my efforts to focus on the excitement of choosing a dress, she continued to make snide remarks. After I finally settled on a dress, Mill approached me and remarked, "I'm glad you chose that, it makes your arms look fat." Giggling afterward, my mother, who had been so patient, snapped at her for such immaturity. I felt tears prick my eyes. No one wants to hear such hurtful things about their dream dress. We decided that Mill would have to find her own way home after the shopping trip. She began to protest, but I was resolute. On my drive to drop my mother off, I received a call from Mark. He questioned how I could treat his mother so poorly and mentioned that she had called him in tears, claiming I had abandoned her. I promised to explain later, but he continued to berate me. My mother, overhearing the conversation, stepped in to defend me, outlining Mill's behavior throughout the day and asking Mark if he thought this was how a respected adult should act. Mark's embarrassment was evident. He had no idea of the full extent of Mill's behavior. When he returned home, he apologized, explaining that he had panicked, worried about his mother's well-being. I reassured him that I wouldn't have reacted that way had Mill not been so cruel to me throughout the day. Mark hugged me tightly, admitting he would understand if I chose to uninvite her from our wedding. At that moment, it was all I wanted, but I hesitated, worried about Phil's attendance and the potential fallout. I couldn't let our wedding pass without his parents there, despite everything. It would have been downright cruel to uninvite her. Before our wedding, Mark and I decided to have a candid conversation with Phil. We made it clear that if Mill's behavior escalated, he would need to intervene. Phil nodded in understanding, expressing his empathy for our situation. I felt for him. Managing Mill's antics must have been exhausting for him, considering he had to deal with her every day. To our surprise, Mill behaved herself during the wedding. She spent the evening boasting about how grand the celebration was, as if she had contributed to any of it. It was all funded by Mark and me, the fruits of our hard work. However, given her affluent background, guests assumed she and Phil were behind it. During the wedding toast, Phil made it crystal clear that they hadn't spent a dime and praised me as an accomplished daughter-in-law, claiming he never thought Mark could secure someone as intelligent as I was. Guests, surprised to learn we managed everything on our own, congratulated us. Mill's face soured with resentment. As the father-daughter dance commenced, my dad and I twirled around the floor, basking in the applause. Just as Mark was about to join us, Mill rushed over, declaring she needed to be the first woman to dance with her baby boy. Mark obliged, and they danced. Later, Mill approached me with a strange mix of congratulation and snideness, stating, "I was wrong. Your arms don't look that fat in that dress." Then, she walked away as if it was a casual remark. I was infuriated, but I didn't want her petty comments to overshadow my special day. Despite her antics, everyone enjoyed themselves, and we danced late into the night, maybe a little too late, with a bit too much to drink. The following morning, I woke to several messages from Mill. I was taken aback when I read her accusations that I had embarrassed her throughout the night and that I needed to do better if I wanted to be part of her family. Feeling a bit hungover, I checked in with my parents to see if I had done anything embarrassing, but they reassured me that everyone had a great time. When Mark woke up, I showed him the messages. He advised me to ignore them, but suspicion crept in, so I pressed him about what Mill meant. Mark revealed that throughout the night, Mill had been whispering to him that I was having too much fun. Even when I danced with my cousins, she insisted I was a wild horse he needed to control now that we were married. He chuckled at her comments, suggesting I brush them off too, but I felt insulted. How dare she belittle my joy at my own wedding? I wanted to confront her immediately, but with our honeymoon looming, I decided to hold off. Our honeymoon was incredible, filled with laughter and adventure. However, upon returning, Mill called me out of the blue, inquiring about our trip. It felt strange, given her typical lack of interest in my life. I took the opportunity to address her comments from the wedding night, but she brushed them off, claiming she meant no harm. Then she pried for details about our honeymoon, asking if we had plenty of alone time. I told her to be straightforward, as our honeymoon was none of her business. She then proceeded to imply that she wanted to know if I would be a grandmother soon. That made me want to gag. First, I had just gotten married, only a week prior. Second, Mark and I had discussed not wanting kids long before we became serious. We liked children but had no intention of raising them ourselves. While we hadn't outright told our parents about this decision, it was a personal choice. Yet, Mill continued, pressuring me to get pregnant quickly because my biological clock was ticking. I cringed as she went even further, suggesting Mark and I should stop using condoms. I shut her down immediately, declaring I was done with that conversation. When I told Mark about her comments, he was furious. Without hesitation, he called her to confront her about her invasive questions. Mill's reaction was predictable. She screamed and raged, as if we had committed some heinous crime. She threatened that if he didn't give her a grandchild, he would receive nothing in her will. Mark laughed, reminding her that she had no assets due to her prenup with Phil, so her threats were empty. She accused me of being the problem, saying it was my duty as a woman to bear children, calling me faulty. Those words cut deep. Mark tried to calm her down, but she persisted, claiming we had destroyed her lifelong dream and questioning why we had gotten married if we didn't want kids. That's when Mark had enough. He firmly told her to stop disrespecting me and declared he was done with her nonsense. He made it clear that she was no longer welcome in our lives and warned her that if she showed up uninvited, we would call the police and expose her behavior to our neighbors, an idea he knew would terrify her. From that moment on, we cut all ties with Mill. Phil tried to intervene once, but after hearing the full story, he supported our decision. My parents and Phil began to meet regularly, while Mill remained uninvited. To our relief, she respected our boundaries. Then, in December, we found ourselves unexpectedly pregnant. Shocked, as it was something we never wanted, we still felt prepared for this new chapter in our lives. Friends and family called to congratulate us, and Mill sent a bouquet of flowers with a letter of apology, claiming she had reflected on her behavior and changed after years of therapy. I didn't respond. I was still uncertain about her supposed transformation. Just 2 months into the pregnancy, I suffered a miscarriage. It happened in the middle of the night, and my heart sank when I saw the blood. I woke Mark in tears, and he rushed me to the hospital, where we learned we had lost the baby. Despite not wanting to be pregnant, we had formed a bond and would have given our child everything. I struggled to process my grief, but Mark and my parents supported me through it. Phil and Mark's family checked in regularly, dropping by to offer comfort. My mom stayed with us for days. Knowing I struggled to get out of bed, I felt broken inside, and I cried for hours. Thankfully, Mark was my rock, and little by little, I began to heal. Last week, Phil invited us to his and Mill's 25th wedding anniversary, a significant occasion for the family. Mark and I hesitated, knowing the topic of our miscarriage would likely come up, but Phil begged us to join, assuring us we needed a night out. Reluctantly, we agreed. This would be the first time. After all these years, we were finally going to see Mill, but given the emotional turmoil I was already facing, I had little energy left to deal with her antics. Mill greeted Mark with open arms, hugging him warmly while she barely acknowledged my presence. I didn't mind, though. I found a seat and let Mark handle his mother. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally, with everyone sharing their latest successes and good news. When one of Mark's cousins announced her pregnancy, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. As everyone congratulated her, Mill suddenly stood up, mic in hand, and launched into a toast. She began with a cheerful declaration about how happy she was to be surrounded by loved ones. Then, with a wide smile, she congratulated Mark's cousin for bringing a new life into the world. But then her tone shifted. While others are killing children, she said, shooting me a pointed look, I know you must have done something to that baby. There's no way it was just a simple miscarriage. Mark and I froze in disbelief, utterly horrified by her cruelty. Mill continued to berate me in front of everyone, claiming that her son had settled for someone like me. She revealed that she had hoped I would at least provide her with grandchildren, but here I was, proving to be incapable of even that. With a triumphant sneer, she declared I was nothing more than a trophy wife and gleefully anticipated the day Mark would finally divorce me, insisting that I was never truly family. The room fell into a stunned silence. Mark, visibly furious, confronted Mill, demanding to know what the hell she was doing. A heated argument erupted, with Mill blaming me and Mark defending me as best he could. Overwhelmed with shame and emotion, I burst into tears. This was too much to bear, and Mill's mockery only deepened my pain as she told me to stop acting, insisting that no one would buy my sob story. Then, unexpectedly, Phil, who had been silently observing the chaos, stood up. Everyone, please calm down. I have something important to say, he announced, taking the mic. For the past 25 years, I've suffered, and tonight has opened my eyes. I'm done. He turned to Mill, confusion etched on her face, and declared there would be no wedding anniversary next year because he no longer wanted to be married to her. The shock on Mill's face was palpable, as if he had slapped her. Phil explained that he had remained married to her for so long to set a good example for Mark, but he could no longer tolerate Mill's behavior and the way she hurt others. He asked the guests to enjoy their meal, but he was going out for a drink. As he walked out, removing his suit and tie, Mill screamed for him to come back, only to shift her fury toward me, accusing me of ruining everything. Mark, anger simmering, shot back that it was all Mill's fault and expressed relief that his dad was finally leaving her. Stung. Mill fell silent and declared she was leaving too. A few guests came to check on me, worried about how I was holding up. Mark's pregnant cousin offered a comforting hug. Since that night, Phil has stayed with us, adamant about not returning to Mill despite her relentless calls. He's mentioned consulting a divorce lawyer. I can't shake the guilt I feel. Am I somehow to blame for Phil's decision to leave Mill? I'm truly seeking honest opinions. Update 1. I didn't expect this post to gain so much attention. Many shared their experiences with toxic in-laws, and it's shocking to realize how common this is. Also, I want to clarify that my husband has always defended me. Growing up with loving parents made me fortunate, but he had a much different experience. He's worked hard to protect me from his mother's controlling behavior. Lastly, I want to thank everyone who shared their own stories about miscarriage. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I feel a heavy burden of guilt over losing the baby, even though it was beyond my control. I know I need to talk to a therapist about this and join support groups for moms who have faced similar losses. Update 2. Phil has officially served Mill divorce papers. It's been 2 months since my last update, and Phil has settled in with us. He's a delightful house guest and has a wonderful sense of humor. Plus, he loves to cook, so sometimes I come home to a warm meal waiting for me. I feel fortunate to have him around and can't understand how Mill let someone so incredible slip away. When Phil and Mark went to deliver the divorce papers, she refused to even look at them. Mill yelled that they had no right to cut her off and claimed her harsh words about me stemmed from wanting only good for the family. Mark ignored her and helped Phil gather his belongings. In a fit of rage, Mill began throwing things and screaming, prompting Phil to threaten her with a call to the police. Since it was technically his house, that silenced her. She realized she had no other options. After the incident, no one reached out to Mill except to express their disdain for her behavior. People quickly saw through her lies about me being a trophy wife, as I have a successful career, and they understood the pain I experienced during my miscarriage. Most of the family distanced themselves from Mill, recognizing that she was the source of her own isolation. She attempted to plead with Phil, but he was steadfast in his decision to cut ties. My parents have also spoken to Mill, threatening legal action if she continues to harass me or defame my character. My mom is not one to hold back and told Mill exactly what she thought. I know my parents would follow through, so I hope Mill keeps her distance. Update 3. I appreciate everyone who has supported me through this journey. It's been 8 months since my last update, and I'm happy to share that Phil is now officially a free man. Thanks to a prenup, Mill couldn't take anything that wasn't hers. Phil let her keep their joint account and the car, but she was furious and demanded the house as well. Mark and his lawyer simply laughed at her, reminding her that it belonged to Phil before their marriage. I've heard she's currently staying with one of Mark's cousins while searching for an affordable place. She has more than enough money to live comfortably on her own. For the most part, Mill has kept her distance from us, although she occasionally tries to reach out to others with her side of the story for sympathy. But as for us, we're happy. Mark and I are doing really well. I've started therapy, and it's helped me connect with friends who truly understand me. Mark has also begun individual therapy to work through his past. Our careers are flourishing, and we're grateful for everything we have right now.